So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a bubble, cut off from the outside world, focused entirely on one topic with many contradictory views. That's not this summit, of course, that's the government. The state of the Brexit negotiations means we can convene at a time of profound uncertainty. Our government's tearing itself apart over it, frankly. Our opposition is tearing itself apart over it, frankly. The most important decision for this country in a generation is being conducted in the manner of Jeux sans frontières circa 1972, sort of vast foam outfits, huge mallets, and an enormous amount of falling over. Brexit Day, less than 200 days away now, and we have the Governor of the Bank of England admitting he's been stress testing the possibility that house prices might fall by a third in the event of a no deal. Our politics are so volatile and fragile, the stakes are so high, the outcomes so unpredictable. Can people rely on investment, on supply chains, on having the workers they need to build the homes that we want? And the clarity in legislation and guidance that we need to be confident for the housing sector to thrive? Or might Brexit actually offer real opportunity, disrupting a sector that needs to embrace new thinking and new technology, relying less on migrant labour and foreign investment? Well, we have a brilliant panel to consider this. We've got Paul, if you could wave when I mention your name. We have Paul Hackett, Chief Executive of Optivo. As you probably know, it's a housing association with ambition to build more than 10,000 homes a year. Peter Andrew is Deputy Chairman of the Home Builders Federation. And Melanie Leech is Chief Executive of the British Property Federation. We are going to be using Slido again. I know you'll be excited by that. Log on at slido.com. Resi18 is the code if you haven't done that already. We'll try and get to those questions a little bit later on. Each of our panelists is going to just sort of set the scene as they see it for a few minutes from here, and then we'll go into Q&A session. So if I could invite Paul Hackett, first of all, to come and talk to us about housing and Brexit. Paul Hackett.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. So are we, the housing association sector, ready for Brexit? Well, I think the first thing to say is that housing associations are long-term businesses, we are patient investors, and we have a really strong track record of being able to deal with whatever political and economic uncertainty comes down the tracks at us. We have a housing crisis in this country, and organisations like Optivo were established to provide homes to address that housing crisis. So we are absolutely committed to doing all that we can to carry on building homes, whatever the circumstances. However, the sector is dependent upon three things to enable that house building to happen. Firstly, the housing and land market. Secondly, the capacity of our construction industry. And thirdly, investment and funding. So in relation to the first of those points, the housing market. Got a chart here of the housing market in London. Obviously more extreme than in the rest of the country, but indicative of where we've been going. In the year prior to the June 2016 referendum vote, we had 12% annual house price growth. In the year to June 2018, we had a fall in house prices of 0.7%, stabilised in August in London, but elsewhere in the country, things are looking pretty bad. And the fastest overall annual decline in house prices since the depth of the global financial crisis in 2009. You probably saw the comments from Governor Carney last week about the stress testing and modelling that the Bank of England have done, and there's some pretty extreme numbers that they've looked at. A 35% collapse in house prices over 3 years was the worst case stress testing model they looked at. Now, for housing associations, we are more dependent than we've ever been, really, on the condition of the housing market, because for large organisations, for G15 organisations, we are very dependent upon market sale receipts to come in order to be able to deliver our housing for sale programmes. So a collapse in the housing market clearly would have an impact on our surpluses. that in turn would have an impact on our ability to invest going forward. Now, I'm sure like every other housing association in this room, certainly we at Optivo take a very, very prudent view on market exposure. So we have a golden rule that says that every scheme which we contract on, which we legally contract on, we must be able to build out that entire scheme without dependence upon any market sale receipts. So in other words, we can convert the entire scheme to affordable housing, to rented housing rather, without dependence upon sales receipts, and without risking breaching any of our funding covenants. So nothing would tip us over in terms of the housing market, but what it would do is reduce those surpluses and reduce that capacity for building in future, and therefore we would need more government help. Now, you may say that a 35% collapse in house prices, if that were to happen, could be good for people looking to get on the housing market. Well, the same Bank of England stress testing suggested that unemployment could rise to 9.5% and base rates to 4%. So it's a very unclear picture. Now, obviously, don't want to scaremonger. These are the worst aspects of the Bank of England modelling, but nonetheless, they're figures that the Bank of England are looking at. If we look now at the construction industry, the capacity of the industry, the headline there from Inside Housing in June was the first example of a large London-based housing association really feeling the impact of the dissipation of EU labour. So these were sites in London after Christmas when EU workers were returning back to the UK from their holidays. Fewer were returning back to these London sites where dependence on EU labour, on average in London's 50%, on some sites significantly higher, so we're already feeling the impact. Clearly the construction industry was struggling pre-referendum with an ageing workforce. The IPPR say that the workforce that we need to build the government's housing targets will be about a third of the size needed by the mid-2020s. And the all-party parliamentary group for excellence in the built environment describe a hard Brexit as disastrous for UK construction, and they're calling quite rightly for a period of time within which we can manage access to overseas labour. So they're calling for at least 5 years, possibly 10, when we can have preferential immigration arrangements in order that the UK has the workers needed to build the homes that the country desperately needs. If we now look at construction costs, since the referendum, we've seen the pound weaker against the euro, against the dollar. A 10% movement results in an extra 2 to 4% on build costs. Each year, we import about 10 billion, or certainly in 2017, we imported 10 billion of construction materials from the European Union and a further 7 billion from other non-EU countries. And of course, the prices are going up because of that exchange rate impact. So the government's construction material index showed an 11.5-point increase between the referendum and June 2018. If we do end up with a hard Brexit and we have to go onto World Trade Organization terms, we would need to pay tariffs of 5.7% and non-tariff costs of a further 6.5%. That would mean on that 10 billion of imports from the European Union, we're paying about an extra 1.2 billion pounds in costs. So that would affect all of us in this room. And of course, housing association business plans are sensitive to differential inflation. Our rents really are most of our top line. At the moment, our rents are going down by 1%. From 2020, they will rise by CPI plus 1%. But if build costs continue to rise at significantly above that level, then our surpluses are squeezed, and there is therefore less money to deploy to build new homes. And if the unit cost of those homes is higher, then clearly fewer homes will get built. Simple economics. If we look now at investment and funding, the UK Housing Association sector has received £5.5 billion of investment in social housing. We receive European regional development funding for physical regeneration, but also for a range of different employment and training programs. So we're involved in a programme with a group of French and British housing associations to help 4,000 social housing tenants. It's focused completely on social housing tenants. That's a really important project for us. We're also involved in the European Social Fund on a project in London with a number of G15 organisations called Love London Working, again, aimed at getting about 4,000 or 5,000 people into employment. So if those programmes dry up, then clearly there's a bigger role for the UK government to fill the gap left by European funding. And there's also the issue of liquidity, both in terms of corporate finance, but also in terms of mortgage finance. The housing association sector has enjoyed long-term funding from the bond market, short-term funding from the banks. There's been no shortage, no appetite to lend to organisations like mine at very, very good rates. Ditto, the mortgage market, albeit the requirement for bigger deposits, is still there and still healthy, including lending for shared ownership. So the future of access to that funding in whatever Brexit scenario we see is clearly, again, very, very important for the sector. If we then look at our tenants' incomes, the Bank of England said that average household income has reduced by £900 in real terms as a consequence of inflation caused by that exchange rate deterioration. For the poorest of our tenants living on welfare benefits, their benefits were frozen in 2016, and you can see the impact from the referendum in June 2016 of inflation, therefore eating into the spending power of those benefits. And of course, we have people living on universal credit, struggling to make ends meet. All of this is making life more difficult for them, and therefore potentially for housing associations. But it's not all doom and gloom, and there are opportunities clearly, as Mark said, to think differently, to look at innovating. There's a need to build up a UK domestic workforce to step in and build the homes that we need. Housing associations invest more than £60 million a year in jobs and training. That's equivalent to half of the government's work programme, believe it or not. So we are really big, significant players, and I'm sure you'd agree there's a lot more that we could do as a sector. And the G15 are involved in a number of quite large programmes to get people into construction training, but I'd like to see more done to use the apprenticeship levy to bring more money into housing associations and into our supply chain. There's also more that can be done in terms of thinking completely differently about construction. The Mark Farmer review and the Nikki Gavron review here in London both said that there is insufficient capacity within the traditional build sector to complete the number of homes that the government wants us to build over the next few years. So there is a need to look at modern methods. G15 members are looking at a variety of methods, including CLT, including modular. This is a scheme that we're building in Croydon with Pocket Living, a modular scheme from a UK modular supplier. But of course, precision manufactured housing itself is not immune to the impacts of an international supply chain. So there could still be inflationary effects on those products. So just to finish off, there's a great deal of uncertainty at the moment as to what shape Brexit will take. And clearly the shape of Brexit will very much determine a variety of things for us. Our residents' income, our funding, our development programs, and our jobs and training programs. And of course, it's not just about construction. It's also about social care. Today, there are 90,000 vacancies in the social care sector in this country. We at Optivo have 4 residential care homes, and 20% of the labour in those schemes, the workforce, is non-UK EU. So turning the tap off on that would have a significant impact on us. A no-deal Brexit clearly would have the most profound effect in terms of the negative effects on the housing market and the potential upward impact on build costs. In terms of construction skills, there are 3 things that I think we need to ask. Firstly, we need an immigration policy, as the APPG says, that gives us that taper and access to overseas labour. Secondly, we need to grow our own, but that doesn't happen overnight. It does take time, but there must be a big role in that for housing associations. And thirdly, we need to look at precision manufactured housing. And again, I think we are very well placed as a sector to really innovate in this space. Now, my final bullet point, was quite prophetic, actually, because I wrote that before we'd heard the Prime Minister's speech this morning. And my last ask was, give us longer-term programs, because if we have longer-term, more flexible funding programs, we can work with our supply chain, with landowners, with JV partners, with training providers, we can provide the apprenticeships, we can work with MMC suppliers, we can do so much more if we have a long-term time horizon. I have to say, I'm absolutely delighted that the government are opening the door with that £2 billion. I very much hope that that's the beginning of a much bigger investment in longer-term deals. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. Next up is Peter. Peter Andrew, Deputy Chairman, Home Builders Federation.
So good afternoon all, and thank you very much for, for inviting me to talk to you today. So I'm Peter Andrew from the Home Builders Federation, and the slides, they are working. So just to give you an idea of what the Home Builders Federation is before we get going, we represent about 80% of, or our members represent about 80% of all new homes built in England and Wales, and our members go from the very small to the very large. So before we get into how Brexit may affect us, I just want to set the sort of context of what the home building industry delivers and what size it is. So in 2017, the home building industry contributed about 38 billion to economic output. There are about 700,000 jobs, and 4.5 billion was put into affordable housing, and a further 1.5 billion was put into infrastructure, both built and social, so fairly considerable. And housing supply in England and Wales has been up 74% in the last 4 years. In 2017, it sat at 224,000, with 217,000 of those being in England. And we expect for the year April 18, it to be up further still. Those numbers come out in November. So that amount of increase has challenged the industry in all sorts of ways, particularly around resources, and most particularly around skilled labour. And just to put some context into that, for every 10,000 homes that we build, we need about 2,500 bricklayers, 1,000 carpenters, and 300 plumbers. And it goes on through all the different trades. And in total, we need about 8,000 new recruits across 12 different jobs every year. So this is a big task. So what does that mean for Brexit? What do those challenges mean for Brexit? Effectively, Brexit's given us further food for thought. The home building industry is quite reliant on foreign labour, and to understand this, last year we did a survey into the home building workforce across the country, including Scotland. Never been done before, quite a big task actually, 37,000 workers across 1,090 sites. And just to share this information with you, about 17-18% of the total workforce is EU-based, 2% from non-EU countries, and that means about 80-odd% from the UK. However, it varies massively around the country, as you would imagine. Up in Scotland, there's very little EU input, but down in the south, it's about 20 to 25% in the southeast, and in London, it's about 50% on average, but some sites have about 70% EU labour. So this is quite a big problem coming down the track at us. But we also have another underlying problem, which Brexit might exacerbate, and that's an aging workforce. So 22% of UK nationals working in the industry are now over 50, whilst it's only 10% in the EU nationalities over this age. And 70% of workers from the EU are in the 20 to 39 bracket, whereas that's only about 50% here in the UK. So any loss of EU workers will only exacerbate this ageing workforce and people heading towards retirement. So this slide, if you can see it, they're all green, but the varying colours are green. The UK is the darkest one. What this is showing really, the key point is that the UK workers are generally at the older end of the sector, and we're not getting enough UK workers into the industry, which obviously, if EU workers start to dwindle over time, will cause the industry a problem and output a problem. We need to deal with it. So what else have we looked at? And we've just heard a little bit about tariffs. So we have looked at a worst case scenario, and a bit like you've just heard, we expect increases in the 2 to 5% for if we go on to WTO rules. But more concern is the non-tariff costs, materials being held at the borders, added paperwork, longer lead-in times, and just-in-time deliveries starting to become an issue. But it's not all doom and gloom. We've also looked at a lot of the regulation that comes from the EU, some of which might be improved over time to increase housing output, and we're working with government and our members to see if we can improve that regulatory framework. So, what about ensuring our future success beyond Brexit? What are we going to do about it? Well, if the government's target's 300,000 homes, the biggest challenge for us, I guess, is around skills, as I've just talked about, and what we do about that post-Brexit. So, the HBF recognised this 2 or 3 years ago and set up a home building skills partnership in partnership with the CITB, Construction Industry Training Board. And this is focused on developing a quality workforce needed to construct today's high-quality homes. And this partnership is concentrating in 3 main areas, which is attracting more Indigenous people into the industry. Once we've got those people, how to train them and keep them in the industry and develop them. And most importantly, this industry operates down through a supply chain, a subcontract supply chain, rather than directly employed people in general. How do we train the people down through the workforce? And that's a real challenge because it's 1 or 2 parts removed from the house builder. So that's probably all I want to talk about. The rest of it will come up in questions. But I would say off-site manufacture will have something to do in this space, and there's a considerable amount of work going on in that. And finally, and this will come up, I'm sure, it's about home buyers' sentiment post-Brexit. So whether we have a dip in output will completely depend on home buyers' sentiment. And I can say that around the country at the moment, with the exception of maybe here in London and a little in the southeast, sentiment doesn't really cover Brexit too much when it comes down to house buying. We're not seeing Brexit getting in the way of home sales at this moment in time. Okay, I'll leave it there and look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Peter. Our final speaker is Melanie Leech, who's Chief Executive of the British Property Federation. Melanie, thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the NHF for inviting me. When I accepted the invitation, I didn't expect to be speaking after the Prime Minister, but I think her presence here is testament both to the importance of the issues that we're discussing today, but also the importance of this event, and I congratulate the NHF on what is clearly a fantastic event. One of the challenges of going last, particularly when you're talking about a topic which is both as broad but as nebulous as Brexit, is actually, if I'd done a PowerPoint, I'm not going to put up PowerPoints, if I had done PowerPoints, they would probably have looked quite similar to both Paul's and Peter's, and they would have said fairly similar things. So I'm going to use my brief time just to tell you a little bit more about the British Property Federation and the people that I represent, and so what gives me my sort of perspective on Brexit and the housing market, and then offer 1 or 2 thoughts around the way forward as we've been seeing it and working on it with our members. So the British Property Federation represents a wide range of members across the whole spectrum of people that make their living from property one way or another. So owners, developers, investors, agents, lawyers, planning consultants. If you make your living out of property one way or another, then the BPF is your home. And the sector that I represent is worth around about £94 billion to the economy each year, and looks after a fair chunk of yours and my savings and pensions. And our particular perspective on housing is primarily around the introduction of a new type of renting in the UK in build to rent. So what is build to rent? It's familiar in other parts of the world, but relatively new to the UK. For me, one of the most exciting things about build to rent in the context of the housing challenge that we're talking about today is that it's bringing genuinely new investment into the sector and a new offer to the market. It's a different type of renting and it's a different type of investor. Long-term patient capital, savings and pensions funds, as I've mentioned, people who want to generate a long-term secure income and who want to bring the brands and the values that they represent into improving communities and into the offer that they give to their customers. Build to rent's not a silver bullet, I should stress, to solving the housing crisis, but it's making a significant and growing contribution at around about 8.5% of new builds completed last year. And it's opening up new partnerships, new ways of thinking about how we can all work together to deliver more housing into the market. We publish quarterly statistics with Savills. At the end of Q2 this year, our research showed that there were almost 125,000 build-to-rent units either completed, in development or in planning. And as it grows, it becomes more nationwide. It really started as a fairly London-based phenomenon. And most existing locations are in city centres, taking advantage of the kind of people that want to be fairly mobile, fairly flexible, but want to be close to their place of work and in those hubs and vibrant environments as well. But there's a growing demand for family homes, and we expect that as build-to-rent continues to mature, it will increasingly be bringing houses for families into the market. Build-to-rent investors and developers want to build at scale, and given that it depends on stable, long-term and secure rental income, the rate of delivery is not restricted by the rate of sale, which is a challenge that some of the house builders that Pete represents have faced. One of our biggest challenges in terms of build-to-rent is finding sites that allow us to increase that size and scale of development. But we are making progress. While only 2 completed developments have over 500 build-to-rent homes each, there are now 25 developments in planning and 12 under construction with over 500 build-to-rents each, and the average development size is now 124 units and growing. Build-to-rent can deliver more quickly than house building. The sector's ability to accelerate delivery on large sites is something the Letwin reviews recognised, and we think the government, just as the Prime Minister's made it really clear this morning, she's recognised the contribution of housing associations. We believe the government's recognised the contribution that build-to-rent can make, and build-to-rent is genuinely coming of age, perhaps the most tangible signal of this being the publication a few days ago of the final version of planning practice guidance for build-to-rent. It's particularly appropriate to be talking about build-to-rent at the National Housing Summit amongst so many representatives of the social housing sector, because one of the most distinctive features of build-to-rent is the way in which it puts customers at the heart and delivers a much higher quality rental experience. We recognise that renters, just as much as buyers, want to call their accommodation home. That's just as true whether they want flexibility and to exercise their right to move on within a few months, or whether they hope their rental home is a place to settle down and put down roots. That's why in April 2017, the BPF gave the government its 3-year pledge on behalf of the build-to-rent sector to demonstrate the sector's commitment to providing additional security and longer tenancies to the customers who require it. Too many people, probably many people in this room, including myself, have poor experiences of renting. Build-to-rent is changing that through the quality of the homes it delivers, the associated public spaces and services, and the focus on building a community, something that you've known and lived and breathed all of your working lives in the housing association sector, but has not been characteristic of the private renters sector for far too long. So on to Brexit then. My starting point is that the sun will still rise in April 2019. The need to house our nation will still remain, as will the need to reimagine and regenerate our town and city centres and to create work and leisure spaces for the future. So our market as creators of buildings, spaces, shelter, homes will still be there. And there are huge opportunities, as both Pete and Paul have talked about, to innovate and to do things better and to provide a better quality of output and service. Next week at the BPF, we're publishing a report we commissioned from the Future Cities Catapult on how we can harness technology to improve productivity in our sector. The construction and property sector has not been quick to innovate. We do a lot of things the same way we did them at least 50 years ago, if not 100 years ago. There are huge opportunities to harness the technology that we take for granted in other walks of life to improve productivity and to improve the offer and the outcomes for our customers. As I said at the start, I agree with both of our previous speakers about the challenges we face in terms of Brexit, investor confidence, the future economic success of the UK as a whole. Both are inextricably bound up, I think, with the impact on the housing market, access to skills and access to raw materials. In helping us to navigate our way through that and to mitigate the potential impacts, the government has many of the levers in its own hands to support us and help us. They can give us a stable tax and regulatory framework. They can continue to reform the planning system so that we can just get stuff done. And they can intervene in the market in the types of ways that the Prime Minister's talked about this morning to support housing associations and the types of things that they've done to support home building and the types of things they've done to free up the planning system to make it easy to get on and build. The government has all of these tools in their own hands, and they will still be there after April next year and after whatever happens in the period post that 2-year cut-off point that signals the end of the initial phase of negotiations. We've set improving productivity and delivery of housing at the heart of our proposal to government for a sector deal under the industrial strategy, and we're looking forward to a positive response to that. But in the meantime, the Prime Minister's announcement here today is clearly a signal of political commitment, and her welcome announcement of new funding for housing associations, but more importantly, that long-term commitment and that trusted partnership with housing associations is hugely welcome and critical to success, alongside the government's tangible support for the build-to-rent sector, which is also populated by funders and people wanting to make a long-term commitment. And the relaunch of a massively energised and energetic Homes England also shows the government will act to support housing delivery. Despite Brexit uncertainty, therefore, and the challenges ahead to modernise and grow our skills for the future, I think there are reasons to be optimistic. That's a message we share with government as we've worked in partnership with the Department for International Trade over the last 2 years to showcase the opportunities the UK property market offers to overseas investors. The UK has many advantages. We have the advantage of our geographic location, which gives us a unique, an almost unique advantage in terms of time zones and the way we can play across the world. Our language, our stable legal system, our stable political system, even in the turmoil, Mark may have a view on this, but even in the turmoil of Brexit and the day-to-day excitement of waking up to another apparent spat within the government or indeed within the opposition. Relatively speaking, if you look around the world, we have a stable political system, and that attracts overseas investment, and that gives us a hugely positive platform on which to build our future. Whether you're a Remainer or a stayer, we have a lot of advantages that we must not throw away and which give us confidence that we can build a positive future, certainly in the house building sector when we have a market characterised by shortage. So I think all of that gives us the opportunity to find firm ground amongst the continuing uncertainty and potential short-term turbulence. After all, shelter in all its forms, including critically a place to call home, is a fundamental and basic human need, and providing it is a long-term game. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Melanie. I think, Peter, you mentioned the word sentiment.
Sentiment.
We are going to be going to Slido for questions, but I thought we'd go old school on the poll. I'm just interested in this room, how many people are excited at the opportunity that Brexit is going to bring for the housing sector? I can see one hand. Any more excitement? Two. How many people are terrified at the prospect of what Brexit might do to housing? Wow. Right. Wow. So more terror than excitement. I think we can certainly say that. Paul, I want to come back to you. This idea of skills training that we actually need to make the journey from where we are now to a sector that is far less reliant on EU migrant labour, particularly in London and the South East, to one where there are homegrown people. Now, we've had the MAC report yesterday. The government's immigration white paper is due in the next few months. In terms of the housing sector and the needs of the housing sector, while we're on that journey from A to B in the time, because you can't just magic, how many extra plumbers you need, what would you like to see the policy be over the next, I don't know, what should we say, 2 or 3 years at least, to get us through this transition?
I think we need an immediate term and a medium term plan. In the immediate term, we do need transitional immigration arrangements that give us access to the construction workers that we need. And the important thing is not just high-skilled construction workers. There are many people who come in who may not have relevant qualifications, but for whom training can happen within the UK to get them up to speed. And we see that in the repairs and maintenance side of the operation as well as in the new build side. So I think we do need to have broad access to labour. We also need to combine that with a medium-term approach around getting the skills within the UK. And housing associations and social housing in general, we have access to over 4 million households. Many people living in our homes are underemployed. They could do a lot more. Our track record as a sector of reaching out and supporting and helping people into training has been very impressive. And I think we can use our buying power to really deliver a lot more of that. And I was hugely encouraged by the direction of travel indicated this morning by the Prime Minister, because if you have a decade-long plan, you can link that to an industrial strategy. You can link that to the Construction Industry Training Board. You can link that to the creation of new training providers that can help us to get the people with the skills that are needed in our industry. And you could also start looking at different ways of building, innovating around modern methods. And there are many people for whom a life of moving from one building site to another isn't particularly appealing. You can have a much more diverse workforce if you can have a static factory. People go every day, they do their shift. It's a manufacturing rather than a skilled trades role. That suddenly opens up the construction workforce. It's no longer aging white men. It can be a much broader sample of the population that will help in terms of cost. It will help in terms of giving us the skills we need.
Peter, I mean, the off-site bit of this equation does seem to me very exciting, and the possibility that we might have, I don't know what the numbers are at the moment, but the number of women, for instance, who are working on building homes. Most building sites, it's pretty small, but I'm assuming that off-site manufacture might encourage a new generation of young, able women to come into the sector.
Absolutely, and particularly as those off-site manufacturers move away from building a sort of using the current skills in a factory into more digitisation, there'll be new jobs created as machines do more. And those jobs are open to everybody in the industry, and we will need to understand what they are.
And while that's clearly a good place for us to get to, and perhaps we've neglected training in the past because it's been so easy to buy labour from Eastern Europe, that actually there is a transition to get. What does your organisation want to see happen? What does it want the immigration policy to look like?
So there is a huge transition as we move to a marketplace where we're relatively reliant on EU labour to a market where we're much more reliant, much more indigenous and grown up through our colleges and the like. So the first thing I'd say is the MAC report yesterday, on the face of it, I felt that was a bit challenging for this particular industry, but actually reading it in a bit more detail, I think there's some there's some positive points, and that's about medium-skilled workers potentially moving into a tier 2 situation along with high-skilled workers. Depends what a medium-skilled worker is, but I would certainly put many of our tradespeople in that bracket. So there's some work to be done with government.
Bricklayer? Is a bricklayer medium skilled?
I would say bricklayers are medium skilled, yeah, and a fine bricklayer is probably fairly high skilled, yeah. So we need to.
But are you going to be paying them enough? Because I mean, often the way that we assess skills is by what kind of salary they can attract.
Yes, so I think the salary level is about 30,000. That's the pinch point.
Are you paying bricklayers 30,000?
I would think we're paying bricklayers at least 30,000, yes, right across the country, if I'm honest. But where do we go? What do we do in that interim period? And that's where the Home Building Skills Partnership, the partnership with CITB comes in, set up 2 or 3 years ago, and it's looked at identifying the really key jobs that drive output. And one of those is bricklayers, and I might come back to that in a minute. But so we're looking at these jobs and how can we make these jobs more attractive to people, particularly young people within the country. So there's a whole lot going on with attracting these people, and we're working with CITB, and they're about to do a big advertising campaign, which may or may not go on the telly, I'm not sure, about how to attract younger people into the industry at a very early their informative years. And then once we've done that, and that takes a long time because the secondary education system around these kinds of skills training at the moment is very disparate. It's all over the place. It's not coordinated, and we need to move to a more coordinated place. Government can help in that and help fund. And then it's about training the people who are already in the industry so they can see advancement. They can move with as the industry goes more technological, goes more digitized, and they can see their opportunities within that. And we need to do this fairly quickly because I talked about an aging population, working population. We've got 50% or roughly of our workforce is 50 or more. I mean, that's a problem coming down the track ever so quick. So we need to move fairly quickly with this. And government have a big area to play in this.
Simon Latson, who's in the room, where's Simon? Has asked a question about how we attract young people into the housing construction sectors. I mean, is there I don't know, Melanie, this might be one that you could help us with. Actually, being in schools, being in colleges, making the prospect of building homes feel attractive to young people who've got other opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent we're part of the bigger challenge in this country around the recognition of technical skills and, alternative routes to building long-term careers, and and I think that is changing. I mean, speaking anecdotally as a parent, I as a parent looking down on and listening to my sons, I am much less persuaded that university is the right route for them, and that there are plenty of other opportunities that are better for them and will give them better prospects. They are saying that in reverse to me. So I think from both sides, that perception is changing. But I think we still have a long way to go to really recognise the kind of skills we're talking about. And one of the biggest challenges in this whole protecting ourselves in the transition to what we all need to do, and I basically represent more of the investors, so they need to take responsibility too for training, making sure that the skills pipeline is there, and we all need to do that and do it a lot better. But in the short term, we're going to need some help just to keep the show on the road whilst we get much better at all of that. And it's about this definition thing. It's about this recognising that these are skilled roles. Yeah. That actually they are fantastic opportunities.
And actually also exciting. I mean, this is the thing that strikes me about where we are currently, with so much disruption, so many new products, new technology, off-site manufacture, the build-to-rent market that you were talking about. This opens up new opportunities, which might be very exciting. It's just, as I think you were describing, the sort of rainy building site, just a lot of mud. Actually, you can offer people really exciting, cutting-edge careers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we're all, I think, in our different ways trying to change the image. And also, I think, younger people coming into the workforce, they care, they want to know they're making a difference. Yeah. And I come back to, shelter is one of the most basic human needs. So if you can be involved in providing homes for people, for providing great leisure spaces for people, whatever it might be, because I represent obviously the broader commercial sector, what a fantastic thing to be part of. And you can see and feel it. You can see what you're doing and how you're making a difference. And I think that should be becoming more and more attractive. But we have to sell that story. We have to tell that story much better.
Okay, another question here. Does the panel agree that it's vital to have a devolved, responsive skills system and long-term spatial plan to attract new talent to construction? Well, very much the same sort of territory. There does seem to be, genuinely a Brexit opportunity through the challenges that come with it. Actually, we can start rethinking some of these things.
I think certainly, I think there's a devolution agenda within the UK that could be developed further post-Brexit. Clearly, the GLA having spatial planning powers has transformed the way that housing delivery works in London. But of course, the other devolved authorities don't have those authority-wide spatial planning powers. So you could see a situation perhaps in the future where Greater Manchester, the West Midlands and so on have more resources, more spatial planning powers in order that you can then devolve down more, including, as the suggestion is there, around training as well.
Can I ask you, Andy Oldale, where's Andy? Andy's asked a question, what are the key practical things housing associations can do to mitigate any potential adverse impacts from Brexit? I mean, briefly, what are the sort of 2 or 3 things that you would say you really need to be thinking about this now?
And the first thing, stress testing. I would hope that if the regulator was here, they'd absolutely be saying, make sure you do your stress testing, understand the implications and the impact. That differential inflation issue that I talked about, it's not just inflation in construction costs in relation to new build. Actually, the biggest expenditure for everybody in this room after our new build programs is, of course, repairs and maintenance. So that's where there is significant impact on our financial plan. So look at the way you deliver your repairs and maintenance programs. And I think the other thing is we need to think more about how technology can help us to drive better value for money in future. And I think it ties into Melanie's point about making housing and property more interesting, more exciting. There are things like BIM, the opportunities to really engage with a younger generation of people who want to think about the way we manage these assets, we manage the built environment in a much more sophisticated and intelligent way. And I think we've not even begun as a housing association sector to think about how some of these tools could absolutely transform the way that we work.
Peter, the question from an anonymous person, why don't the main house builders seem to want to embrace and progress modern methods of construction? Well, I presume you would argue that they don't.
Well, they are. They're just not necessarily to market at the moment. So the off-site manufacturing marketplace at this moment is fairly unorganized and fairly disparate. And all the big house builders, I can assure you, are all over the world looking at what off-site manufacturing in terms of total house down to components can be incorporated. And there are a number of trials going on right around the country by many house builders of different types of product. But what I would say at the moment is that from a component side of home building, there are many off-site manufactured components going into houses at this moment in time. Sometimes people just think off-site means a whole new house coming on the back of a truck. That's a little bit down the track. There's some of that happening at this moment in time. But as I say, it's at its infancy. And some of the work that Mark Farmer, who's on here next, talks about will help get to a place where that's a bit more organized. So I will say that I think large site trials are imminent, if not already happening, and this marketplace will grow organically as confidence from a house builder's point of view grows in the particular products. So I think it's all very positive. I see a lot of the off-site manufacturing of houses building sort of houses in a factory rather than using digitization and new equipment and modern robotics and the like. But even that is starting to be looked into. Sheffield University is probably a leader in this area. So we're at the cusp of going down the hill, I think. And there's a lot of work being happening, but don't think it's a silver bullet. We're not suddenly going to get 100,000 out of our 200,000 homes a year built out of MMC. It will be growing incrementally because it is all about confidence of buyers, confidence of architects and the like, and confidence of house builders and particularly mortgage lenders about these products before it will become a really big part of the sphere. But it's growing and it's really positive and very exciting.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I just wanted to ask a completely unfair question to you right at the end. The Prime Minister was sort of referring to a 10-year sort of time plan. People obviously in this sector do sort of plan across periods like that. So let's think ahead to 10 years' time, give it that sort of time length. Do you think that Brexit will prove to be good or bad for helping with the housing crisis when we're sitting here in 10 years' time? Paul, will we think Brexit actually that was the thing that changed minds and made us think more imaginatively and think about homegrown skills and so on, or will we be just cursing it as something that's undermined our opportunity?
I think in terms of the GDP and the macroeconomics, everyone is saying whatever Brexit scenario we end up with will not be great news for the UK. So I think that's the starting point. However, having said that, from a housing association point of view, since we had the Brexit referendum, we had a new Prime Minister, and as Theresa May pointed out this morning, the three things the sector asked her to do, she's done. She's supporting us with long-term deals. So I think we've got a political environment where actually what we've been saying for years is now being understood by government. It feels like the right environment is open to us. And I think if in 10 years' time we're in a stronger position, it's because we, the sector, have listened and we've stepped up to the plate and we've been more innovative and creative to deliver.
So 10 years' time, better or worse?
I think better.
Okay. Peter?
And the short answer, I think in 10 years it will be better as well. And the reason I say that, this industry is incredibly resilient. If you look at what happened to it in 2009, where it was on its knees, it's now built back up again, and that's across the whole sector, new home builders and housing associations and the like. And that will happen again. So they're incredibly resilient. That aside, the marketplace is generally domestic. With the exception of London and a few other cities, it's generally domestic. In 10 years' time, we will be halfway through, hopefully, fixing our housing issues in terms of our building more homes. And I see that over a period of time, MMC will start to add additional homes. We need more players on the pitch. That's why I was really pleased with what was announced this morning about getting housing associations. So I see it as positive.
Okay. Melanie, yes or no? Positive or negative?
Brexit will be what it will be, and I agree with Paul that that's a much bigger question than just housing market. But if the government maintains its commitment to long-term delivery of housing supply across all 10 years, then the levers are in our own hands very largely, and there's no reason why we can't be in a much better place if that commitment remains.
Well,
Can I just add one thing?
Very quickly.
That goes across all governments, regardless of what government we have in 10 years' time. If housing isn't at the top of the agenda, there may be some issues there, but let's keep housing at the top of the agenda.
Well, an interesting amount of sort of unanimity and positivity to end our discussion on Brexit. Thank you very much indeed to our excellent panel. Thank you all very much. Thank you.